Hey guys, what's up? It's Nate, and it's time for well, it's technically a bite size, but I'm thinking I'm going to actually sort of label this as a "How should we then play?" It's sort of a thing. It's a sub series that I kind of wanted to make its own thing, um, asking questions about how well, just trying to interact with and explore and ask questions about the way that we interact with video games on a slightly more deeper level than we do on the breakdown, but it's, someday maybe this is the kind of stuff where it's like, I'm throwing this out there and someday maybe I'll make a Sunday school curriculum or something about it. Or maybe, I don't know, write a book or something. I don't know. Wouldn't that be scary if I wrote a book? But hey, so yeah, we're kind of going to be asking questions. And actually, I think I'm going to be doing this I'm going to kind of be I would like to stick with this for a little bit. I've been thinking a lot about time lately, and you might have even noticed that the title here is "Worth Your Time." And so yeah, so let's just kind of get into it, and I'll this is yeah, it's going to be some loose, slightly discombobulated thoughts, and I apologize for sort of any incoherence or just insanity that happens after this. But let's let's get after it. So, anyways, the point of this one is I have a bit of a pet peeve with, just as a general rule, I really don't like when people default to the hours per dollar metric in evaluating games or sort of trying to justify games. And most recently, this came up when Crimson Desert released not too long ago. And I noticed in some of the different places that I hang out online to talk about video games that that was like one of the things that I saw popping up in a lot of different places where people were like, "It's 130 hours long. Isn't that great? And it's only $70." And there's just something in me that reflexively kind of kicks against that, that kind of balks at that I just don't like it. It just irks me. And it's not because it's an entirely bad metric, right? I do think there are problems with it, and that's some of what we're gonna be talking about, but I what I will say is as sort of a caveat right at the beginning is, like, I understand that for certain people, that makes a lot of sense. It's if you're somebody who only buys 1 game a year or maybe 2, like, yeah, you're definitely gonna want to sort of extract as much value, and so you're gonna be a lot more conscientious about, like, where those dollars go, right? And so I'm not trying to attack somebody who's trying to be savvy. What I'm actually trying to go after here is the idea that somehow longer equates to better, because there is this conversation about value in the gaming space all the time. And a lot of times, again, when I see that these conversations popping up, it kind of there's that statement or that idea kind of pops up where it's like, well, how long is it? And to me, that's actually that's problematic in a lot of ways, because I think one, it sort of flattens the conversation, and it treats all hours that are played as being equally valuable. And I don't think that's the case at all. And I actually think it matters for Christians most especially, because we're sort of, well, one of the primary currencies that we have is our time. And if we're being good stewards, we want to make sure that we're utilizing our time well. Now, sometimes there at some point in time, it's like somebody's gonna like, well, are playing video games a good use of your time? And my answer to that is, they can be. I'm not saying they are all the time. I think actually sometimes they can be detrimental and they can be a waste of time. But I think for mature believers, there's reasonable room to engage with video games. Now, and there's lots of different techniques and tools and methods that we can talk about, and that I probably will end up talking about some of these other things. But I think we're going to just sort of make the assumption, right? We're going to presuppose that, like, hey, yeah, Christians can play video games. that, and I mean, that's kind of the entire premise of what we do over here at the Breakdown is like, our sort of our mission statement is we want to encourage and equip the church to engage with video games wisely and well. And so in a sense, yeah, in some ways, you could always probably find something better to do than play video games, but I don't think that brutal productivity is actually at the heart of Christian living. I'm going to save that conversation and all of that stuff for something later. And honestly, you could probably scrub through the podcast, and I've probably talked about this stuff to varying degrees. But what I really want to talk about is, I think, again, sort of attacking this idea of like the hours per dollar metric as sort of being the defining metric, especially, sort of, and I want to challenge Christians who might sort of default to that to maybe ask some more questions, because I think we can all agree that not every video game is worth the same amount of time and attention. And I think this is a matter that is a lot more pressing for somebody like me who engages with video games more often than not as art. And so a lot of times when I'm playing a game, I'm asking the question is, what does this have to say? What does it have to show me? I'm trying to engage on thematic levels or just whatever. Now, I'm a sucker for mechanics. I love like a good, just like rule set or good systems. So I think sometimes, that that is can also be, I think it's not just story, it's story is important, especially if we're sort of engaging with this as sort of a narrative art form, right? But like, I don't know, man. Like, one of my favorite games is Shadow of the Colossus, and you guys have heard me talk about this often, but that's a game that I think you can speed run in under 5 hours. But I would say, like, pound for pound, that 5 hours is excellent. That's S tier content. And I think what that game has to say and what it's taught me and the way it's challenged me, just in some, again, sort of like the delivery, the sort of the philosophy of the design, all of it, like, I would put that over something. I would, I'm like, I have no bones. I make no bones about the fact that, like, I think that's a better game than 90% of the games out there. So there are a lot of people, it's one of the things about now, and I guess before I get too far afield here, I do want to say, like, I'm not opposed to spending a lot of time in a game for like, I played, I played Destiny 2. I have like over 1,000 hours in that game. I logged 130 hours into Octopath Traveler. I think I have over 100 hours in Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. I've played multiple JR. I got the platinum in Dragon Quest 11 Definitive Edition, right? So it's like, and that, I think that's like 130 hours, 140 hours. So it's like, I have no problems with going deep and spending a lot of time. But I think that the issue here is like, I don't want to see us conflate quality and quantity, because these are two values that aren't the same thing. And I actually think that that's kind of the problem, that we do sort of muddy those waters, especially when we sort of get into this reductive thinking. And again, we flatten this conversation where we're just like, the primary sort of criteria becomes the hours per dollars metric. Now, again, I said this came up during the Crimson Dawn, release, and there are a lot of people who are like, it's 130 hours. That sounds great to me. It's $70. That's like $2 an hour or whatever. And I'm not completely dismissing that. And actually, I think like Crimson Dawn actually presents a really compelling and interesting experience. Like, that's 130 hours of a fairly rich world that's full of interesting systems, has lots of things to discover and explore. And so I would actually really agree with that. But again, and this is going to maybe sound like a little bit of a hot take, but like Skyrim, you can put hundreds of hours into that. And I just don't think that that's worth the same amount of time as, like, again, probably I don't know, maybe I've played Shadow of the Colossus like dozens of, not dozens, but, I've played it a lot. I probably put like 50, 60, 70 hours into that game. And I would say that the 50 hours that I've spent in Shadows of the Colossus actually is much more valuable than I don't know, the 100 odd hours that I've put in to Skyrim when I played that. And so that's the gist of this here. And it's like, and I actually think as Christians, again, because we want to be good stewards of our time, we need to be wrestling with, are we using our time, why, like, as when we're playing video games, are we playing games just to sort of fill up the time? Are we playing them to just sort of be entertained? Are we being mindless consumers? Or are we engaging these things on a deeper level, on maybe even a more, or like we sort of embracing maybe the challenge of something really hardcore like Elden Ring or one of the Souls likes? Are we sort of seeking mastery with something? Like, what, I make no bones about it, I love Diablo. I One of the reasons I love Destiny 2 is like the build crafting. Like, I like to make these systems where it's kind of like these Rube Goldberg machines where you put all the different pieces together in the armor with the different passive effects and everything else, and then you kind of you watch the machine unfold in real time on the screen. I love card games and deck building games for that very reason, right? Again, it's the Rube Goldberg machine, kind of like, it's that mastery, and that sort of, these things are a puzzle. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with just maybe wanting to tune out sometimes. I think actually a little escapism in the proper dosages is really pretty healthy. But I don't want to see us filling up our time with like low quality, just time killers, just slop, more or less, when we could be engaging with and pursuing much higher end experiences. And I think actually that, like, as Christians, I think there's a very strong argument that we ought to be sort of not really Epicurean, but sort of pursuing, like having more refined taste. And we're not just like trying to play anything just to sort of like, again, sort of like chase down novelty or sort of get lost in the hype train. Or, we're not just looking for like, just dopamine hits, but rather, and again, I'm not saying, I want to stress this and reiterate this. I'm not saying that those can't be a part of the cycle from time to time. I'm just saying this shouldn't be the defining characteristic. And that's a lot of times, like I said, the hours per dollar metric sort of reduces down to that. It's kind of almost like, you can spend $15 and go to yeah, no, there's a Chinese restaurant that's an all you can eat buffet, and it's like $15 now. And it's decent. It's good food, but it's not like awesome. Like the other day we took my father, my wife's stepdad, out to lunch for Father's Day, right? And we took him to, there's a ramen shop and they do like stir frying, but we took him out for dinner, and I did not pay $15 a plate. It's like, it was a little bit more expensive than that, but we were paying for a higher quality food. Now we were still getting a lot, but it's like, you ask me about the quality of the food that I got at Takumi versus the quality of food that I get at, the Golden Buffet, and it's, or Blue Moon, or wherever we go, it's like, there's a pretty substantial difference. And it's even, again, I think this is kind of a common talking point within games, because again, we're obsessed with value. And I think in this market that makes sense, right? We all know that our dollars aren't going as far as they used to. We all know that, like, this hobby is getting more expensive. But I want us to challenge ourselves to, maybe, again, I think there is wisdom in sort of just waiting for sales and things like that. I also think, like, hey, like, sometimes you have to speak with your wallet, and you have to encourage the things that you want to see more of. So we need to be creatures of nuance and discernment here, where we, in one of the ways that we can engage and should engage with this is just mindfully. And I think that means actually avoiding, sort of surface level takes. I think that means avoiding sort of, pretty basic analysis. And I think that actually means, like, sort of like maybe challenging ourselves to reevaluate the way that we approach things, to reevaluate the way we just think about this, and all of the different framing. Hold on. I do have a couple things I wrote down, and I just, yeah, well, I just Yeah, I know that's really great radio, and you're probably like Nate. You probably should have prepared more for this. Yeah, sorry. I don't do this professionally. Yet maybe someday. But all that being said, there is something here that I wrote down. I said that I think we have to be really careful here because again, that sort of I don't want to say it's causation, but I think there's correlation between when we default to sort of getting as much as possible for sort of like, the price point. And again, I do think there's wisdom in that. Like we want to be savvy with our money. We want to be savvy with our finances. But we all know that we have limited time. And so I think part of it is sort of saying like we also need to be kind of choosy with the experiences that we engage with. Um, and we want to avoid, sort of compulsion. And rather, I think that when we're playing games, we should be cultivating curiosity. And I think the best, so it's one of those things where there's kind of a formula where you have it's not quality versus quantity, right? Um, it's actually quality times quantity equals value. And so there's like you can have a game where it's like it's mid to low quality and there's hundreds of hours. And that might be comparable to something that's like 4 hours long, but is just, or 15 hours long, but that's just an absolute banger the whole way through that you replay multiple times, even, or that you want to replay multiple times, or, maybe a game that's long and good, because there is this thing where you don't want to just, I think this is the other thing that I've noticed is that oftentimes I've said it myself and I've seen it where people were playing games and it was like, it was just too long. It was 10 hours too long. It was 20 hours too long. It was whatever, 30 hours too long. And it's kind of one of those things where it's, again, that's sort of the more does not equal better here, right? That actually the game would have been better if it was 20 hours shorter. I think about, I recently abandoned Doom Eternal, and I'm not saying that that's a bad game, right? I think it's probably a great game. Also, just it's not for me anymore. Like I think it's not even really the violence, although that I'm kind of like I can take or leave that, I think. But I think it was just I had put 15, 20-ish hours into it, and I knew that I wasn't really close to being done with it. And I tend to be a little bit of a slower gamer, and it had overstayed its welcome. And so that's kind of what I want to challenge us to sort of think about is that, why are we playing? And are we just sort of chasing more for the sake of sort of, fulfilling a compulsive need? Or are we engaging with things, and that challenge us and make us think? Are we like, because I think games actually are in a pretty unique place where they can foster curiosity, they can foster thought, they can foster conversation. And now I'm not saying that's all that games need to be. I'm just saying that I think that's something we need to take into consideration. But yeah, it's just I wanted to offer a little bit of pushback against that. I wanted to say, and I think this is actually, again, I'm going to restate this. I think this is actually really important for Christians, especially in gaming spaces. This is a way that we need to think about the way that we think about these. We need to maybe even reframe some of the ways that we think about it. And that we need to maybe be a little bit more discerning. We need to maybe re-examine and challenge our criteria for why we're playing games. And I think this is a way in which we can do that. It's like I really want to encourage the listeners and the watchers here to sort of prioritize quality over quantity. Like, hey, when quantity and quality meet, that's awesome. But I would encourage you and I would challenge you to maybe play shorter games that offer substantial, just that sort of pursue excellence over, games that are sort of, they're good enough, but they're and the only really advantage that they have is that they're just really long. I don't know, man. I mean, also this is subjective. So maybe you're just saying, Nate, you don't know what you're talking about, whatever. And I think you're wrong. But hey, if you think I'm wrong, reach out to us. There's going to be links at the in the show notes. You can say, Nate, you're stupid, and that's a bad take. To which I would just sort of say, well, you're allowed to be wrong. But hey, thanks for your time, guys, and until next time, be good, do the things, and we'll catch you later.